Hey guys. So over the last couple of days, the Carolina Panthers have been chastised for trading Brian Burns. And you can feel justified in feeling that way. But I do think there are some ways that the fans, the media pundits, and national talk shows aren't really talking about one word in particular, and that's leverage. Leverage is a huge part of any kind of trade, and no one really is talking about how do we get from 2022 getting two first round picks and a second round pick to now only getting Brian Burns for a second and a fifth. So, in this video, I'm going to take you back to 2022 and kind of carry along the story of how exactly we got here. So, back in 2022, for the Panthers side, we were not doing good. We were 1-5. We just fired Matt Rule, thankfully, and we transitioned over to Steve Wilkes. Over the next week, we had traded Christian McCaffrey, and it made sense. We needed to try to get a fresh start. We had some potential backups in Dante Foreman and Chuba Hubbard that it worked out. And we wanted to give him, his due diligence for what he's done for the franchise. So it makes sense why we wouldn't exactly be really willing to part with Brian Burns. Now on the Rams side, they were 3-3. They were coming off a bye, and they also had just beat us. So there's that too. But they had also just won the Super Bowl, and they wanted to keep the Super Bowl window alive. Back then, they were also about the F them picks, and they were willing to do whatever it took to keep that Super Bowl window alive by trading for Brian Burns. One of the things that's not being talked about is, yes, it was two firsts and a second, but at the time of the 2022 trade deadline, the Rams do not have a first round pick in 2023. So instead, it is a 2024 first round pick, a 2025 first round pick, and a 2025 second round pick. So we would get no draft compensation for the 2023 upcoming draft. And if the Brian Burns trade works out for the Rams, those are late first round and second round picks. Now, yes, that's still a lot of draft compensation, but in the beginning of the trade talks, there's no compensation for right here, right now to replace what Brian Burns does for this team. So it kind of gets skewed there. Now, obviously, I'm kind of projecting of like, if Brian Burns had worked out, this is what would have happened, but it's still valid. So it makes sense why they wouldn't be jumping for joy for the two first round picks in a second because of what happens right here, right now. Here's the dilemma. When Scott Fitter decided not to do that trade, you set in stone that you don't have the leverage anymore and that you have to pay him because you can't just let someone like that walk. You have a year and a half to negotiate, and obviously trade talks broke down. Now I want to talk about more about the Rams here right now before I dive a little bit deeper into the aftermath of the Panthers. But because the Rams didn't get Brian Burns, they lost for a majority of the remaining of the games. The two wins they had was Baker Mayfield's first day pretty much in a Rams uniform, and then also the Christmas Day massacre of the Broncos. And that's when they realized they needed to do a soft rebuild. They shipped out Ramsey, they got rid of a lot of the cap casualty that they had, and they just ate the cap, something the Saints should do. And it really helped that this year they had Puka Nakua, they had Kobe Turner, they had Byron Young, who all contributed as rookies, and they actually had a healthy Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford. So it worked out really well for the Rams. However, it did not work well for the Panthers because, yes, we didn't get draft compensation, and then now we were in a situation that Scott Fitter got fired, Samir Sumar got fired. Both of them were the ones who were negotiating with Brian Burns the whole entire time and did not give him a contract. So it comes down to Dan Morgan. Yes, Dan Morgan was assistant GM during this time, but he's not the one who's controlling the negotiations. Here's the other part that people aren't really thinking about. Brian Burns wanted a $30 million a year contract. Does he deserve it? That's up to you to decide. But for me, I'm comparing him to Max Crosby. Both of them came out of the same exact draft class. Both of them, before Max Crosby got paid, were on very similar paths. About 7, 8 sacks per year, really disruptive. they were almost the same exact kind of player because they always would get pressures, but sometimes could not convert them to sacks. Max Crosby in 2022 got paid. He got paid 4 years, $98 million. Now, obviously, that 24.5 million is not in total guarantees, but it's still significant. And he outplayed that contract over the next 2 years. He's had back to back double digit sacks, over 12 and a half. One year he had over 14 and a half. Brian Burns, since 2022, had that Pro Bowl year where he had 12 and a half sacks. Then last year, he talked about how he was kind of playing, he didn't want to get hurt in his last year of contract, which is fair, but he also did not produce. I think that was the significant part where we can't pay someone 30 million a year on defense. We have other contract negotiations that's going to have to go on, and we have a rookie contract of Bryce Young that we have to help him out. So I think that's where people kind of don't really think about the future. They look at the you look at right now. You have to set up for Bryce. When you make that trade, when you go get your guy and you invest a lot of draft capital in him, you have to help him out. And it's not going to help paying a defensive end, well, outside linebacker, 30 million a year. So you kind of just have to go with what you have. And the other thing people aren't talking about is it takes two to tango. In a trade, not only do people have leverage, but they have to be willing to give up significant draft capital because it is still significant. A high second round pick is still a potential star player, and they also have to be willing to pay him 30 million a year. And not a lot of people are willing to do that, especially in free agency frenzy. So that's the reason why we got here. We were only able to get a second round pick and a fifth round pick for him. Of course, there's a pick swap, but that's not really that big of a deal. But I think there's another thing too that I'm trying to see from Dan Morgan of why he also didn't pay Brian Burns. I talked about the draft compensation and what we got back, and also how the contract would work out. We had offered him a 27 mil contract. Now, obviously, we don't really know the stipulations of the contract, but we still know that that was an offer. I think that's a fair offer. Yes, not 30 million a year, but it still would be among the upper echelon of pass rushing, caps getting paid per year. But I think there's another reason why that Dan Morgan didn't do so, and that's for the future. I've already talked about it a little bit before, but Derek Brown is also getting paid either this year or next year. I'm hoping this is a learning time and that we do not do what we did with Brian Burns, that we do with Derek Brown. Pay the man. He should be our next franchise guy, and he deserves to be paid. Because if we let him walk next year, he is going to get paid. So I think that's another reason why we didn't pay Brian Burns, because not only do we have to pay Derek Brown, but eventually when J.C. Horn stay healthy, he's going to get paid as well. And do you really want to have three significant cap hits on the defense when you need to surround your rookie quarterback with good talent? That's where sacrifices have to be made, and that's the reason why they didn't pay Brian Burns. So to wrap this all up, yes, I agree. There are a lot of problems with the Panthers organization right now, but is one of the reasons why the Panthers didn't get draft compensation because they were just dumb? That's for you to decide. I hope that I was able to really bring about how we got here. How do we get from two first round picks and a second round pick to a second round pick and a fifth? I want to, finish this off by saying I wore this jersey, this old Brian Burns jersey, for a reason. When we did not trade Brian Burns, I got this jersey for Christmas because I thought he was going to be a foundational piece for our team. Unfortunately, we didn't sign him, so he's now gone. But the other jersey I got was of Derek Brown. Obviously, as an Auburn fan, I love Derek Brown. But I also think he's supposed to be our foundational piece. So I'm hoping and I'm praying that we don't make this mistake again. Please pay Derek Brown. keep pounding, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.